They thought they were alone, the sole apex predators in a galaxy teeming with fragile lesser species. For centuries, the Xilari Dominion had ruled unchallenged. Their empire stretched across 600 star systems. Their war fleets had shattered entire civilizations, and their warriors had never known true defeat. This was not arrogance, it was fact. No species had ever matched them in combat. No world had ever resisted their conquest. No adversary had ever survived long enough to be remembered. The Xilari were Deathworlders, beings forged by an unforgiving world that had culled the weak and left only the ruthless, the cunning, the indomitable. Their homeworld, Vraxis IV, was a place of endless trials, where the ground itself could swallow the unprepared, where the air could turn to poison with the shifting of the seasons, where the creatures that lurked in the dark did not flee from the Xilari, but hunted them. To live there was to struggle every day. To rule there was to be without equal. So when the Xilari expanded into the stars, they did so with the certainty of gods. Every species they encountered, every civilization they crushed, every empire they absorbed only reinforced the truth they had known since their first steps beyond Vraxis IV. They were the first and the last of their kind. There were no other Deathworlders. There never had been. Or so they believed. The first warning came as a whisper in the void. A remote colony, Outpost Valoran III, sent out a distress signal, an automated scream of panic that echoed through subspace before being cut off mid-transmission. That alone was cause for concern. Xilari outposts were built to withstand planetary sieges, engineered to survive conditions that would reduce most life forms to dust. Even if under attack, even if overwhelmed, a Xilari garrison would fight to the last, and their final transmissions would be filled with battle cries, last words, demands for vengeance. But Valoran III had gone silent. No war songs, no emergency orders, no final stand. Just nothing. The Dominion's response was swift. A Xilari reconnaissance vessel, the Spear of Dominion, was dispatched to investigate. It arrived within hours, slipping through the swirling gas clouds of the system's outer rim, its hull gleaming against the light of a dying red sun. But there was no colony. The ships that had once orbited Valoran III, defensive platforms, mining barges, merchant vessels, were gone. Not destroyed, not drifting, not reduced to debris, but gone. As if something had reached into reality itself and erased them. The surface of the planet below was worse. The colony had stood for over a century, a city of steel and fire that had once pulsed with industry, with life, with the defiant strength of the Xilari people. But now it was nothing but an emptiness that should not have been. No ruins, no wreckage, no bodies, just a vast, glass-like expanse stretching to the horizon. A perfect, smooth wasteland where once there had been towers, streets, and warriors. The planet itself seemed sterilized. The crew of the Spear of Dominion was silent as they scanned the surface. Their instruments told them nothing. No radiation signatures, no biochemical residues, no trace elements that might indicate weaponry. The colony had not been bombed, nor had it been vaporized by some advanced kinetic strike. It was simply gone. The reconnaissance team retrieved what little data they could from orbit. Fragments of corrupted files, degraded transmissions, distorted audio logs. The Dominion's best analysts worked tirelessly to restore what had been lost, and from the wreckage of fragmented signals, a single message emerged. A distress call from a Xilari warrior. The voice was filled with something unnatural, a thing no Xilari had ever felt, no matter the enemy they faced. Terror. Not weapons, not ships, not an army. Something else. Something inside. The voice shuddered. It's watching. Then, only silence. The last recovered image from the outpost's security feeds was equally disturbing. The footage was warped, filled with static, distorted by some unknown interference. But in a single frame, just for an instant, something moved. Something humanoid. But not Xilari. It was wrong. The shape was there, the outline vaguely resembling the bipedal stance of many sentient species, but its proportions were unnatural. Its posture was unnatural. The light around it seemed wrong. And then, in the final millisecond before the recording cut out, two pale eyes turned toward the camera. And the screen went black. The Dominion did not hesitate. They dispatched a war fleet. Not a mere patrol, not an exploratory force, but a full-scale eradication armada. 20 battle-class dreadnoughts, a force designed not to fight, but to erase. The Xilari were not fools. They did not act recklessly, nor did they ignore danger. If something had the power to wipe Velrun 3 from existence, it was a threat unlike any they had faced before. It had to be met with overwhelming force. The fleet arrived at Velrun 3 within days. Their weapons were primed. Their warriors were ready. Every Xilari on board knew what was at stake. This was not about conquest. This was about survival. And yet, as they entered orbit, they found nothing. No enemy fleet, no army, no signs of battle. Then the sensors picked up a single object, a vessel, drifting, silent. It was unlike anything they had encountered before. Sleek, angular, dark. It had the shape of a warship, but no markings, no insignia, no signs of origin, as if it had simply appeared. The Xilari hailed it. No response. They scanned it. Nothing. Then it moved. Not the slow drift of a disabled craft, not the sluggish realignment of a damaged vessel. It moved with purpose, with precision, like a predator. And in that moment, the Xilari, the conquerors of worlds, the unchallenged apex predators of the galaxy, finally knew fear. The Xilari fleet hovered in silence, their warships locked in place, a heavy weight pressing against the stars around them. Their sensors pulsed rhythmically, scanning the dark void where the unknown ship now drifted, untouched by time or space. The ship's design was alien, its edges too sharp, its contours too fluid. It didn't belong in the Xilari lexicon of warcraft. It was a thing born from a mind beyond their understanding. Every instinct in the fleet's command structure screamed that it was a trap, one that had already claimed an entire colony without a single shot fired. The Warlord Prime, commander of the fleet, sat in the heart of his flagship, the Dominion's Fury. His fingers drummed against the black stone of his command table, the faint hum of the ship's systems vibrating through his hands. The silence in the room was suffocating. The crew members standing at attention, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and unease. This was not their usual kind of fight. This was not conquest. This was something else. From his elevated command seat, Warlord Prime could see the entire fleet before him, each vessel hovering like a titan in the dark expanse of space. His battle-hardened eyes flickered toward the view screen where the unknown ship lingered. No weapons, no shields, no movement beyond the ominous glide through the emptiness. And yet it was alive, alive in a way that unsettled him. The fleet waited, seconds stretched into eternity. And then, without warning, the unknown ship broke its silence. A ripple of energy cascaded outward from its hull, a pulse that seemed to warp the fabric of space itself. For a brief moment, the Xilari fleet's sensors flickered, their readings warping, as if the ship were in more than one place at once. Time itself felt fractured, broken, as though the laws of the universe were bending at the edges of this alien craft. Suddenly, a voice, a deep, resonant tone that felt like it came from the core of the void itself, boomed over the fleet's communication channels. "Are you worthy?" The voice was not Xilari, not any language they had ever encountered. It had the richness of the ancient, of something older than the stars themselves. It was not a challenge. It was not an invitation. It was a question. The Warlord Prime's eyes narrowed. His sharp mind raced, calculating. His entire species had endured untold challenges, and yet this moment, this question, was different. It was not an attack. It was not a declaration of war. It was a probe, a test. And for the first time in his life, the Warlord Prime felt a deep, gnawing sense of uncertainty. The unknown ship's words lingered in the air, like an echo. The meaning behind them felt hidden beneath layers of cosmic mystery, something that only those who understood the true nature of the universe could comprehend. He had faced the finest tacticians, the most cunning warlords, the deadliest weapons, and none had made him feel this sense of dread. The auxiliary fleet remained silent, their weapons trained on the alien ship. But then, without any further warning, the unknown ship moved again. Not toward them, but into the void. The ship seemed to shift in space, vanishing, only to reappear in a different direction, a fraction of a second later. The auxiliary had seen this kind of movement before, but only in subspace jumps. Quick, violent bursts of energy that moved a ship across the galaxy in an instant. But this was different. The alien craft did not jump. It simply shifted, like a shadow flickering at the edge of their vision, as if the rules of existence itself had bent to accommodate it. The fleet's sensors detected nothing. No energy trail, no radiation signature. It was as if the ship simply was. A whisper of panic rippled through the crew. The Warlord Prime's mind raced. What were they facing? What was this thing? Then, without warning, a flash of light. The unknown ship shot forward, too fast, too precise, and before the auxiliary could react, it was on them. In that brief, terrifying instant, the fleet was plunged into a storm of chaos. The Dominion's Fury, the flagship of the fleet, was struck first, not by weapons, not by energy beams or missiles, but by something more primal. The ship's hull buckled, groaned, and then tore open with a violent metallic scream, as though the very atoms of the steel were being pulled apart. The force was not external, it was internal. Something had reached into the core of the ship, something that pulled at it, tugging, distorting, warping the structure. The Warlord Prime's command chamber shattered in an instant, his body flung against the walls of the now dying ship. For a moment, there was only darkness. When he regained his senses, the view screen was shattered. The bridge was silent, but the battle was far from over. All around him, the ship's systems were failing, alarms blaring as the crew scrambled to maintain control. The alien vessel was still there, a phantom that moved with an unsettling grace. It seemed to observe the destruction it had wrought. It wasn't a fighter. It wasn't a warship. It was something else. A hunter. The Warlord Prime struggled to his feet, his body aching, his mind racing. This was no ordinary battle. This was no conquest. This was something ancient, something older than the stars themselves. He reached for the communications console, his hands trembling. The Dominion fleet was in disarray. The alien craft had torn through their most powerful ships with ease, as though they were nothing more than fragile toys in its presence. There was no fighting back against it, no resistance. The question echoed again, this time from every communication channel. Are you worthy? It was not a challenge. It was a revelation. The auxiliary were not alone. They had never been the only Deathworlders, and whatever stood before them now was far, far worse than anything they had ever encountered. The Dominion's fleet was falling apart. A storm of chaos erupted in the void, a brutal testament to the terror that had descended upon them. The Warlord Prime, once unshakable in his confidence, now stood in the heart of the wreckage, struggling to comprehend the scale of the disaster. His fleet, his warriors, his empire were being torn apart by something so alien, so fundamentally different from anything in their experience that it shattered the very foundation of their understanding of the universe. The alien ship moved with a terrifying grace, its movements too fluid, too perfect. It was no mere warship, no simple predator hunting its prey. It was something otherworldly, a force of nature, a force of the cosmos itself. As it glided through the stars, it seemed to warp the very space around it, bending reality to its will. The auxiliary fleet could not even get a proper lock on it. Their weapons, advanced beyond anything most species could even imagine, fired and missed, unable to even make contact with the vessel. It was as though the ship was never really there, constantly shifting through the fabric of space, as if the laws of physics had no power over it. The Warlord Prime staggered to the ruined bridge, his body bruised and battered from the shockwave that had torn through his flagship. The floor was strewn with debris, the walls were scorched and warped, and the lights flickered like dying stars. The crew was in disarray, some struggling to maintain control, others already succumbing to the overwhelming effects of the alien ship's presence. Panic was setting in, but the Warlord Prime forced himself to remain calm. This was not the time for panic. This was the time for action. He slammed his fist into the control panel, trying to reconnect with the remaining ships of his fleet. The connection was weak, distorted by the aliens' interference, but he could hear the frantic voices of his commanders, their fear palpable even through the static. "They've destroyed the Helix 9. It's gone. Warlord, the Abyssal Blade. We've lost contact. We can't." A burst of static drowned out the rest. The Warlord Prime's eyes narrowed. They were falling apart. His fleet, his warriors, the very might of the auxiliary dominion, was crumbling beneath the weight of this unknown enemy. "Focus," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Do not give in to fear. We will not fall. We will." A ripple of energy shook the ship again. This time, it was accompanied by a low hum, a sound that resonated deep in the bones of every auxiliary soldier aboard. It was a warning. The alien ship, which had been skirting the edge of the fleet, was now moving closer. The intensity of its presence grew, like a predator closing in on its prey, preparing to strike. The Warlord Prime took a step back from the command console, his mind racing. This ship, this entity, was not simply a military force. It was something else. It was a presence. It was a force of cosmic scale. Every move it made seemed to defy the laws of space, time, and matter. As the alien ship moved closer, the very fabric of space around it seemed to bend. The stars twinkling in the distance seemed to blur, like a canvas distorted by the brush of an unseen hand. The auxiliary warriors who had once fought with unmatched ferocity now found themselves helpless. Their weapons could not touch the alien vessel, their tactics meaningless against an entity that existed beyond their understanding of warfare. And yet, despite the hopelessness that gripped his soldiers, the Warlord Prime's mind sharpened. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a test. The words of the alien vessel echoed once more, like a challenge etched into the very air around them. "Are you worthy?" The question reverberated through the mind of every auxiliary, unsettling them to their core. What did it mean to be worthy? And who was asking the question? The Warlord Prime's thoughts flashed back to the beginning of the Dominion's rise. They had always believed themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution, the apex predators of the galaxy. Their empire was built on the foundation of their ability to survive in the harshest conditions, to conquer worlds that no one else could even dream of inhabiting. They had fought wars, crushed civilizations, and become legends. They were Deathworlders, and the universe had bent to their will. But this was something different. Was the alien asking if they were worthy of life, or was it asking if they were worthy of existence itself? Was it testing their dominance, their ability to survive in the cosmos, or was it probing something deeper, a measure of their understanding of the universe? Were they even worthy to claim the title of Deathworlders? The Warlord Prime's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shockwave, a massive explosion that tore through the outer hull of the Dominion's Fury. The alien ship had moved again, striking with an intensity that was impossible to comprehend. The very structure of the ship seemed to contort, bending outward as if some unseen force were pulling it apart from the inside. The Warlord Prime was thrown against the walls of the bridge once more, but this time, the pain was less important than the reality that was unfolding before him. He could no longer pretend that this was a battle to be won with weapons or tactics. The alien ship was not playing by the rules of war. It was operating on a level that they could not even begin to understand. A deep guttural growl reverberated through the shattered command center, not from any of the auxiliary warriors, but from the very walls of the ship itself. The sound seemed to come from the ship's core, an ancient resonance that was at once both unnerving and familiar. It was as though the ship itself was alive, responding to the presence of the alien ship, an entity that existed in a way the auxiliary could never have conceived of. It was then that the Warlord Prime realized the full extent of the danger they were in. The alien ship was not just a threat. It was a revelation. It was showing them that the auxiliary were not the apex predators they believed themselves to be. They were simply one species in a universe that was far larger, far older, and far more complex than they had ever imagined. And now, that universe was forcing them to face the most terrifying question of all. Were they worthy? The auxiliary fleet was on the brink of collapse. What had once been a vast armada, an unstoppable force of warriors forged in the fires of countless battles, was now reduced to a scattering of broken ships and panicked survivors. The Dominion's Fury, flagship of the Auxiliary Warlord Prime, had become little more than a husk, its mighty hull fractured and torn. The once pristine corridors of the ship were now silent and empty, abandoned by the crew, save for a few scattered souls who clung to the fractured remains of their ship, hoping for a miracle that would never come. The alien ship, this thing, remained unmoved in the center of the battlefield, a dark silhouette against the glittering stars. Its form shifted, as though it were not bound by the same rules of space and time as the auxiliary. Every motion seemed deliberate, like a hunter surveying its prey before the final strike. No weapons fired, no shields flared. It did not need to. The ship was the weapon. The very presence of the entity bent the very fabric of the universe to its will, warping the auxiliary ships into twisted, contorted shapes, as though their very molecules were being pulled apart by the cosmic force that emanated from it. The Warlord Prime, now one of the few remaining survivors of his once proud fleet, stood at the shattered bridge of the Dominion's Fury. His hands were stained with the blood of his soldiers, his mind haunted by the sounds of screams and the flashes of destruction that had taken place in mere moments. They had been foolish to think they were the apex. They had believed that their power, their strength, their deadly efficiency could dominate any enemy, crush any challenge. They had believed that their status as Deathworlders made them untouchable. But now, standing amidst the ruin of his once great fleet, the Warlord Prime was forced to confront an unsettling truth. They were nothing. As he stared at the alien ship in the distance, the question that had been asked over and over again continued to echo in his mind, an unrelenting mantra. Are you worthy? The Warlord Prime's gaze hardened. His once unshakable belief in the superiority of his people had been shattered. But his resolve, that spark of defiance that had carried him through countless battles, remained unbroken. The question, that challenge, was not just about their ability to survive. It was about something deeper, something far more fundamental. Was the auxiliary Dominion worthy to even exist in the same universe as this alien force? Was their violent, destructive way of life truly the ultimate expression of life itself? Or was it a mistake, a flawed attempt to conquer a world that could never be fully understood? In the silence of the bridge, the Warlord Prime's thoughts raced. The alien ship was not attacking. It wasn't fighting. It was simply observing, waiting, watching. It was as though it knew that the auxiliary would destroy themselves without any help. Perhaps in its ancient wisdom, it recognized that the auxiliary were trapped in a cycle of violence, one that could never truly bring them peace. And in that recognition, it had asked the question, are you worthy? Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a voice, low, resonant, and all-encompassing. Echoing through the broken hull of the Dominion's Fury, it was the same voice that had reverberated across the fleet, a voice that seemed to come from the very edges of the cosmos. Do you understand now, Warlord? The words seemed to vibrate through the Warlord Prime's very soul, reaching into his mind, pulling at the fabric of his consciousness. It was no longer a question of battle tactics or military strategy. This was something far more profound, far more insidious. This was a test of the very nature of existence. His breath caught in his throat as the voice continued, deeper now, more intimate. You fight to survive. You fight to dominate. But you do not fight to understand. You do not fight to evolve. Do you even know what it means to be truly alive? The Warlord Prime's mind whirled, struggling to comprehend the alien intelligence that spoke to him. His life, his people's entire existence, had been built on the principle of survival. They had mastered war, conquest, and the art of killing. It had made them the most feared species in the galaxy. And yet here was a being, a force, that seemed to look at them with a mixture of disdain and pity. The realization hit him like a shockwave. The alien wasn't interested in victory. It wasn't interested in war or bloodshed. It was beyond such things. It was a force that transcended the simple desires of physical conquest. This was something that had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched as stars were born and died. This was a cosmic entity, one whose motives were inscrutable, whose goals were not bound by the same constraints as those of mortal creatures like the Extraterrestrial. It didn't need to conquer. It didn't need to kill. It simply was. The voice spoke again, its words carrying a weight of knowledge that was beyond anything the Warlord Prime had ever known. You are not the first to ask these questions, and you will not be the last. But remember, Warlord, to truly evolve, you must first understand what it means to let go of the desire to control. You must understand that in the vastness of the universe, you are but one thread in a grand tapestry. Your survival is a fleeting moment in the eternal flow of time. And when you learn to let go, to truly understand, you will see the cosmos in a way you cannot even imagine. The alien ship moved again, its form rippling as it began to shift once more, slipping through the fabric of space as though it had never been there in the first place. It was a movement so subtle, so precise, that it was barely perceptible. But in that moment, the Warlord Prime understood. This being wasn't interested in destroying the Extraterrestrial. It was interested in teaching them something that the Warlord Prime's people had long forgotten, the meaning of life beyond survival. As the alien ship disappeared into the void, the Warlord Prime stood alone amidst the wreckage of his fleet. His warriors, his soldiers, had perished. His empire had crumbled. And in the silence that followed, he was left with a single, haunting thought. What had he missed? In the aftermath of the Extraterrestrial fleet's destruction, there was a strange, unsettling quiet. The battlefield, once a maelstrom of death and fire, now lay still, an eerie calm settling over the broken remnants of the warships. The stars, distant and cold, hung like silent witnesses to the carnage. But in that silence, something far more profound was unfolding. The Warlord Prime stood amidst the wreckage of his once proud empire, now a shattered reflection of the force it had been. His fleet was gone. His warriors, his comrades, had fallen. The Dominion was no more. The ship was silent. The Dominion's fury, its once thriving command center now little more than a husk, continued to float in the vastness of space. Only the faint hum of the ship's systems provided any sound, a ghostly reminder of what had once been. The Warlord Prime, bruised, battered, and alone, moved through the corridors of his dying vessel. The lights flickered intermittently, casting long, twisting shadows on the walls. He passed through rooms that had once been filled with life, now silent and abandoned. Each step felt heavier than the last. The reality of his failure pressed down on him like a weight. But there was also something else, something deeper, something unseen. The weight of the alien's words still echoed in his mind, a constant refrain that tugged at the very core of his being. Do you even know what it means to be truly alive? He couldn't escape it. Alive. What did it mean to be alive, really? Was it simply the act of survival, of fighting, of dominating? Was it the endless cycle of conquest and destruction that had been the foundation of his people's existence? Or was there something more, something greater, that he had failed to see? The Warlord Prime made his way to the command bridge, where he stood before the shattered view screen, staring out into the cold expanse of space. His reflection stared back at him, his once proud form now worn and battered, a broken shadow of his former self. He looked out at the void, the infinite blackness that stretched out before him, and a deep, gnawing emptiness began to take root in his heart. The universe was vast, immeasurably vast, and here he was, a solitary figure, with no fleet, no empire, no purpose. But then, a flicker of movement caught his eye. It wasn't the alien ship. It had long since vanished into the folds of space. But something else, something far more subtle. A light, a soft pulse of energy, emanating from the center of the ship. He approached it cautiously, his senses on high alert. As he drew closer, the light grew stronger, brighter, until it enveloped him entirely. The Warlord Prime stepped into a chamber he had never seen before. It was small, hidden deep within the heart of the ship, and yet it radiated with an ancient primal energy. The walls were etched with strange symbols, glyphs that seemed to pulse with life. The air was thick, charged with a low hum, as if the very room itself was alive. He could feel it in his bones, in the very marrow of his being. The presence of something beyond comprehension, something that had been waiting for him, just as the alien ship had. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and upon it was a sphere, smooth and black, its surface swirling with iridescent light. It seemed to breathe, as though it were alive, shifting in the light, as if it were a living organism. The Warlord Prime approached it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of dread and fascination consuming him. His fingers hovered above it, but he did not touch it. It was as if the sphere called to him, beckoning him closer, drawing him in. Then, without warning, the sphere pulsed with a blinding light. The Warlord Prime's body stiffened, his mind reeling as the light flooded his vision, blurring everything around him. In that instant, he felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever experienced, a wave of understanding that crashed over him like a tidal wave. It was as though the very essence of the universe itself had been laid bare before him. For the briefest of moments, the Warlord Prime saw it all, the cosmos, stretching out in all its terrifying vastness. He saw the birth of stars, the death of civilizations, the ebb and flow of time itself. He saw the endless cycles of life and death, of creation and destruction. He saw himself, not as the mighty conqueror he had once been, but as a single thread in a grand, unfathomable tapestry, a mere speck in the grand scheme of existence. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The Warlord Prime stumbled backward, gasping for breath. The light from the sphere faded, leaving him alone in the dark, empty chamber. The overwhelming sense of understanding was gone, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. He was still standing in the wreckage of his ship, still alone in the cold silence of space. And yet, everything had changed. The words of the alien ship echoed again, this time more clearly, more definitively than before. Do you understand now? The Warlord Prime's mind swirled with questions. What had he seen? What had that light revealed to him? And what was the meaning of the alien's message? What had the sphere been? It was clear now. This was not just a test. It was a lesson, one that transcended his understanding of warfare, survival, and conquest. It was a lesson about the very nature of life itself. But what did it mean for him? For his people, for the universe? And how could he share this knowledge when the very foundation of his society had been built on the opposite principles? As he stumbled out of the chamber, the Warlord Prime realized one undeniable truth. The question had never been about the survival of his species. It had never been about victory in battle or conquest over enemies. It had always been about something far more fundamental. What was the purpose of life itself? The silence around him felt suffocating now, but somewhere in the distance, the faintest glimmer of hope began to stir. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward, a path that didn't lead to more destruction, but to understanding. The universe was vast, far more vast than the Warlord Prime had ever imagined. And yet, in the wake of his people's collapse, the once unshakable sense of dominance over it all had crumbled. Standing amidst the wreckage of his fleet, on a ship that no longer had a purpose, the Warlord Prime was consumed by an eerie silence. The remnants of the Extraterrestrial had once believed they were the apex, the inevitable conquerors of the galaxy. Their power had been their identity, their very essence. But now, in the face of an alien intelligence that existed beyond the constraints of time, war, and survival, the truth had hit him like a cold wave. They were nothing. He had felt it, that moment. The instant when the universe unfurled its truths before him, stripping away the illusions of grandeur. He had witnessed the grandeur of the cosmos, the passage of time in its rawest form, and yet he still found himself adrift. Even with the knowledge granted by the alien intelligence, there was a weight that remained on his shoulders, a burden that could not be shaken. But one thing had become clear to him. The Extraterrestrial were no longer the center of their own story. That honor had passed on to someone, or something, else. The alien intelligence that had destroyed his fleet had not come to conquer. It had come to reveal. It had come to ask a question, but it was not one the Warlord Prime had yet fully understood. The question had not just been about the worthiness of his people to exist in the universe. It had been about their evolution, the purpose of their existence, the reason why they had fought, bled, and sacrificed everything for a cause that now seemed meaningless. The alien presence had opened his eyes to a deeper truth. There was no war, no battle, no fight that could truly define the purpose of life. There was no conquest that could bring lasting peace. These were mere illusions, glimpses of control in a universe that would never be fully understood. The only thing that mattered was growth, the constant cycle of adaptation and understanding that was inherent to life itself. But just as the Warlord Prime began to wrestle with this realization, he felt a shift in the very fabric of the universe around him. The ship trembled as though it were caught in the grip of some unseen force, the hull groaning in protest. The Warlord Prime instinctively gripped the rail before him, his eyes narrowing. This was no ordinary tremor. Something was happening, something beyond his comprehension. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a flash of brilliant light, a streak of energy that coursed through the ship's systems like a wave. The view screen erupted in a cascade of glowing data, and for a brief moment, the Warlord Prime saw it. The same alien ship that had destroyed his fleet, now flickering in and out of existence, shifting. It was as though the ship was not bound by the same physical laws that governed the rest of the universe. It existed in multiple states at once. One moment here, the next, somewhere else. And with each shift, the light from the ship seemed to pulse with intensity, as though it were feeding on the very energy of the ship itself. A voice, the same deep, resonant tone that had haunted the Warlord Prime's mind, spoke again. But this time, it was not directed at him. It was as though the words were spoken to the universe itself. Look upon the cycle, Warlord. You have seen destruction. You have witnessed death. But you have not seen the other side. The Warlord Prime's heart raced. His blood ran cold as he watched the alien ship's movements. The ship wasn't just a vessel of war or destruction. It was something more. It was a guardian, a watcher, tasked with ensuring that the universe continued to evolve. But why? What was the purpose of this intervention? The voice continued, its tone as inevitable as the stars themselves. You are not the first to ask these questions. Your kind has long sought the answers. You are not the first to fall into the trap of violence and control. Many before you have failed, and yet there is still hope. You have been given the opportunity to understand. But will you? Will you choose the path of understanding, or will you cling to the empty solace of destruction? The Warlord Prime's chest tightened. He had been so certain of his people's superiority. For so long, the Extraterrestrial had reveled in their belief that they were the inevitable conquerors of the stars. But in the face of this ancient intelligence, This force that transcended all concepts of war, conquest, and survival, he understood that their true purpose had never been to dominate. It had always been to learn, to evolve, to understand. The alien ship pulsed again, its energy growing brighter, more intense, and with that pulse came a shift, a deep, resonant shift in the fabric of the universe itself. The Warlord Prime felt it in his bones, a vibration that seemed to ripple through every atom in his body. It was as though the universe itself were being torn apart and rebuilt in an instant. A new order, a new understanding was beginning to emerge. The boundaries of what had once seemed unbreakable were fading, blurring, as if time and space itself were giving way to something greater. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the energy dissipated. The ship stilled, and the view screen returned to its previous state. The alien ship was gone. The Warlord Prime stood alone, trembling in the quiet aftermath. But as he looked out into the depths of space, he realized that the universe had changed in ways he could never have anticipated. The question, once posed by the alien intelligence, now echoed louder than ever in his mind. Will you choose the path of understanding? The galaxy that the Xelari had once believed was theirs to conquer, to bend to their will, was no longer what they had thought it was. It was a vast, interconnected web of knowledge, of life, of understanding. And the Xelari had only ever scratched the surface. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was still time. Time to evolve. Time to learn. Time to understand. The Warlord Prime's gaze hardened, his resolve slowly returning. He would not let his people fall into oblivion. There was a chance, a slim chance, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless that they could choose. They could choose to walk the path of growth, of true understanding, or they could choose to fall forever into the abyss of destruction. The decision was his. The choice was theirs. The Warlord Prime stood at the precipice of a decision that would shape the future of his people. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before him, a cold and indifferent reminder of the consequences of inaction. His mind raced as he wrestled with the alien intelligence's words. Will you choose the path of understanding? It was more than a question. It was an ultimatum. The very survival of the Xelari could no longer rest on the pillars of war and domination. The universe had revealed itself to him in ways he could never have anticipated, and now the choice lay before him. His mind drifted back to the days when the Xelari had been at the height of their power. The relentless march of their empire had seemed unstoppable, each victory a testament to their superiority. They had believed, without a shred of doubt, that they were the ultimate species, the chosen, the ones destined to rule the stars. But the alien presence had shattered that illusion in a heartbeat. And yet now, in the wake of their defeat, a different kind of power was emerging, one that was intangible, subtle, and yet more profound than any weapon they had ever wielded. The Warlord Prime's thoughts were interrupted by a soft, almost imperceptible hum in the air. It was the same energy pulse that had come before, but this time it was different. There was no flash of light, no overwhelming surge of force. It was gentler, like a whisper in the dark, a beckoning. The alien intelligence was calling again, not with the force of a cosmic storm, but with a voice that resonated deep within his soul, a voice that he could feel in his very bones. The choice is yours, Warlord Prime, the voice intoned. It was neither threatening nor commanding, but laced with a quiet urgency. The universe does not wait. You must decide. The Warlord Prime closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on him. The destruction of his fleet, the collapse of his empire, it had all led him here, to this moment of truth. He had been so certain of his path for so long, so unwavering in his belief that war and domination were the only means of survival. But now, standing at the edge of the void, he saw a different path, a path that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. His gaze shifted toward the shattered remnants of his fleet, now drifting silently in the dark. The once imposing ships of the Xelari, the symbols of their might, were nothing more than broken husks now, silent monuments to their own arrogance. And then, just beyond that, He saw it. The stars. The vast, unfathomable expanse of the galaxy. A galaxy it was teeming with life, with possibility, with potential. For the first time in his life, the Warlord Prime felt small, not in the sense of weakness, but in the profound realization of how insignificant one individual could be in the face of the endless cosmos. But it was not a sense of despair. No, it was a revelation. A realization that perhaps true strength did not lie in the subjugation of others, but in the ability to grow, to adapt, and to understand. True power was not the ability to destroy. It was the ability to evolve. The alien ship, which had vanished from his sight, was still there in his mind, its presence lingering in the air around him. He could feel the weight of its knowledge pressing down on him, urging him to listen. He had seen its form flicker in and out of existence, its power defying the laws of the universe. It had not come to destroy. It had come to teach. It had come to show him that the universe was a place of endless potential, a place where life could not be defined by war, but by growth. He turned away from the shattered wreckage of his fleet, his eyes now focused on something more important, the future of his people. He had seen the horrors of war, the destruction that it brought, and the hollow victories it had yielded. And now he saw a different future, one where the Xilari could rise from the ashes of their former arrogance, where they could rebuild, not through force and subjugation, but through understanding, cooperation, and shared knowledge. But as he stood there, on the precipice of this new future, doubt crept into his mind. Could the Xilari truly change? Could they set aside their centuries of bloodshed and embrace a path of peace? The very essence of their culture had been built on conquest. Their strength was forged in the fires of war, their unity bound by a shared belief in their supremacy. Could they abandon all of that? Could they evolve? A wave of exhaustion washed over him. He had no answers. He only had the choice. And that choice, now clearer than ever, was not a simple one. It was not a decision between war and peace. It was a decision between remaining in the comfort of what they had always known, or embracing the unknown, stepping into a future that was uncertain, but full of potential. He closed his eyes again, allowing the silence of space to envelop him. The voice of the alien intelligence came once more, gentle but firm. The cycle of life, of creation, of understanding. This is the true essence of existence. You have seen destruction. You have seen death. But you have also seen the potential for growth. Will you choose to walk the path of understanding, or will you cling to the old ways? The question hung in the air like a weight, pressing on his chest. The Warlord Prime could feel it now. His entire existence had led him to this point, this one pivotal choice. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized that the true nature of his people's survival did not lie in the battlefields, but in their ability to change, to evolve, to embrace the unknown. And then, in the stillness of space, with the universe itself holding its breath, the Warlord Prime made his decision. He turned away from the broken remains of his fleet and faced the future, a future not defined by conquest, but by understanding. For the first time in his life, the Warlord Prime felt a sense of hope, not for his people's dominance, but for their evolution. He had made the choice. The path of understanding, of growth, had been laid before him. And now it was time to walk it. The stars, cold and distant, gleamed down upon him as he stepped into the unknown. The universe was vast, and it was waiting. And so, as the last remnants of the Xilari Empire faded into history, a new chapter began, one that would not be written by the sword, but by the pursuit of knowledge, of understanding, and of life itself. The Warlord Prime had chosen. The question now was, what would the universe choose next?